Welcome to the National Naval Aviation Museum. I'd like to thank you for coming to this edition of Discovery Saturday. This is the Battle of Leyte Gulf, which is very timely. This took place in October of 1944, so we're in the anniversary month. And I'd like to take just a moment to introduce our presenter today, retired Navy Captain Kevin Miller. He was designated as a naval aviator in 1983. And he served aboard many aircraft carriers, including the USS Nimitz, USS Dwight D. Eisenhower, the USS George Washington. In 1998, he commanded the gunslingers aboard USS Enterprise, participating in combat operations Desert Fox and Southern Watch. Captain Miller earned a Master of Science in Business Management from Florida State and a Master of National Security Policy and Strategic Studies from the Naval War College. He accumulated over 3,600 flight hours and 1,000 carrier landings from the decks of 11 aircraft carriers. His personal decorations include the Bronze Star, the Air Medal, and 2 Strike Flight Air Medals. He serves as Vice President for Legislative Affairs for the Tailhook Association and currently is the Executive Vice President of our Naval Aviation Museum Foundation. Please join me in welcoming Captain Kevin Miller.
Thank you, Shelley, and ladies and gentlemen, good morning. The Navy sends senior officers that are going to command ships and squadrons to Newport, Rhode Island for 2 weeks of leadership school. And you might think that these officers would have figured it out by that point, but it's an outstanding course. And at the end of the course I was able to attend in the 1990s. They brought in a gentleman, his name is Mr. Ed DeJardi. He's wearing a business suit, glasses too big for his face, kind of a nondescript gentleman. But he was introduced as the officer of the deck aboard USS Johnston, October 25th, 1944, off Samar. And I had some passing familiarity with Johnston as a student in naval history. Some of you are on to me there. And, but I was interested to see what this gentleman had to say. And he talked about his personal experiences of being there that morning. And I am aware of several people in this audience that also were there that morning. Leyte Gulf was the largest naval battle in history. And by the time it occurred in October 1944, the United States is winning World War II. There is still much to be done, and the Japanese are still a determined and capable enemy. But the arsenal of democracy, after 2.5 years, has supplied the Navy and the Army and Army Air Corps with the means to take the war to Japan. The Battle of the Philippine Sea in June of 1944 virtually eliminated Japanese naval aviation from the decks of the aircraft carriers. This was a battle commanded by Admiral Raymond Spruance. This was the landings at Saipan and Tinian. The Japanese opposed these landings in force. American carrier aircraft flying the F-6F Hellcat, like this one right here, aboard ships like USS Cabot right here, were able to destroy over 600 Japanese aircraft. This is also the battle where Admiral Mister sent a late afternoon raid to accomplish this and neutralize the Japanese fleet, requiring the American carrier pilots to come back to the ships at night, which was not a common thing to do, and Admiral Mister made a decision to turn on the lights and allow his aircrew to recover. The Japanese Navy was still not put on the bottom at Philippine Sea. And now, in October of 1944, the 3rd Fleet Commander, Admiral William Halsey, was going to do just that at Leyte Gulf. Why Leyte Gulf? Months earlier, President Roosevelt had met with General MacArthur and Admiral Nimitz and said, okay, where do we go next, guys? Admiral Nimitz made the case, let's go to Formosa. Let's cut the Japanese supply lines coming up from the Dutch East Indies, and we can avoid their stronghold in the Philippines, and we accomplish the job. General MacArthur said, Mr. President, you've got to go to the Philippines. Think of the millions of Filipino Catholics, Christians. How would that affect your standing back home if you avoided them? And he's also thinking about his own legacy because he said that he would return to the Philippines. MacArthur carried the day, and the United States decided to land in the Philippines and drive the Japanese out of their colony there. The Japanese knew that that would be a disaster to them. Their supply lines from the Dutch East Indies, their vital supply of oil, would be cut, and that would be over for them. They had to oppose this. So the Japanese put together an elaborate three-strong strategy, and they're very good at this. They had displayed this throughout World War II. The strategy consisted of a decoy force up north, which consisted of aircraft carriers that were virtually slick of airplanes. They were all lost. Two surface forces that would come in from the south and the center. The southern force up through the Surigao Strait, and the center force through the San Bernardino Strait. They would then catch the Americans sleeping at their amphibious landings. They would destroy the landing force. They would wreak havoc. Many men would die. And this would be in October, right before the American election in 1944, which Roosevelt would surely lose because of this disaster, and that would give Japan a chance to win the war. Now, that was not going to happen, but the Japanese had an understanding of the American political system, like our enemies do today. So here's the Northern Diversion Force led by Admiral Ozawa, the Southern Surface Force, and then the Center Force led by Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita. Again, the Philippines must be held. And here is Kurita's Center Force standing out of Brunei as they went to do battle with the Americans. These two big boys here are the super battleships Musashi and Yamato, 70,000 tons. The largest battleships, the largest ships in the world at the time. So again, Admiral Ozawa is up to the north, and he is going to make noise. He's going to say, hey, I'm here, attack me. Bring Halsey and his fleet up there so Kurita and the southern force can come in and wreak havoc at the landing beaches. So here's Admiral Kurita. He's got the two heavies, Yamato and Musashi, 3 other battleships, 9 cruisers, a bunch of destroyers, a very significant and capable surface force. The southern force has a couple of older battleships and some cruisers and destroyers there. This was all Japan could muster. This battle space, as you can see, is roughly 1,000 miles long. Here's the southern force coming up here through Surigao Strait. Here's the center force, Kurita. His job is to come through San Bernardino Strait. Ozawa's up to the north. He's going to draw the Americans up there, and the Japanese will be free to wreak havoc on the landing beaches, as we see. And again, the Philippines were held by Japan. Japan had airfields throughout these islands. Task Force 38 and the 3rd Fleet was commanded by Admiral William F. Halsey. Bill Halsey, and the press called him Bull, which he hated. But that's what the press called him. And he was now in charge of the American fleet. 17 fast carriers. Ships with names like Intrepid and Lexington and Cabot. 6 fast battleships. Ships with names like Alabama, Iowa, and his own flagship, New Jersey. 17 cruisers, 58 destroyers, all kinds of auxiliary craft. I mean, this is the most powerful fleet the world has ever and likely will ever see. He has 2 missions, is to guard San Bernardino Strait and then to destroy the Japanese forces when they came out. So here's San Bernardino Strait right here. So his mission is to guard that, make sure that Japanese don't come through there, and destroy the forces where he sees them. On the 23rd and 24th, there were actions that took place here in the Sabine Sea by his carrier aircraft. We'll talk about them in a minute. Now, the 7th Fleet was commanded by Admiral Thomas Kinkaid, and his boss was General MacArthur. Admiral Kinkaid's 7th Fleet, their job was to land at Leyte Gulf, the amphibious forces, to provide support. He had a force of battleships to do this. He had a force of escort carriers to provide close air support and combat air patrol over the landing beaches. His boss is General MacArthur. Halsey's boss is Admiral Nimitz. So you see the tectonic plates of these 2 areas of responsibility bisect and rub against each other pretty much around the San Bernardino Strait region. The Philippine Islands is cut by this difference in command and control, and that's going to pose a problem later. On the 23rd, the submarine starter and Dace ambushed Kurita's force coming up from Brunei, and they sank a cruiser, Kurita's own ship. His own flagship was sunk. He's fished out of the water, brought aboard the battleship Yamato to continue the fight. On the 24th, they were attacked by carrier airplanes from Halsey's fast carriers. And these airplanes, they rolled in pretty much on the battleship Musashi, put many torpedoes and bombs into her. A swarm of little blue airplanes was able to sink the 70,000-ton ship. And many other of the Japanese ships in this force were damaged. They withdrew to the west. So pilots came back to the fleet and said, yeah, we sank them all, and they all withdrew to the west. And not that pilots embellished from time to time, but Halsey and his staff tended to believe this and think that, okay, we've neutralized the center force. Now we can go after the carriers, which we really want. The southern force was met by Admiral Jesse Oldendorf's battleships on the night of the 24th. The southern force battleships had names like Tennessee, California, Maryland, and West Virginia. These were all survivors actually raised from the mud of Pearl Harbor and refurbished and put back into service, and they exacted their revenge. The Japanese were hit by American PT boats, then destroyers with torpedoes, and then these battleships themselves that were able to fire their 14-inch guns in anger and exact revenge for Pearl Harbor. The Japanese force to the south was virtually wiped out by this night action. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a veteran of USS West Virginia with us here today. George, could you please raise your hand to be recognized? Task Force 38 finally found the Japanese carriers to the north off Cape Engano, and Halsey said, okay, boys, we got them now, and here we go. Admiral Halsey took all of Task Force 38 with him. He did not form Task Force 34 that he said he would, that Nimitz and Kincaid and the other naval officers expected would remain behind to guard San Bernardino Strait. Took everything with him, including his own flagship, New Jersey. Because this, ladies and gentlemen, was going to be like Nelson at Trafalgar, Togo at Tsushima, Jellicoe at Jutland, but he wasn't going to let the Japanese escape. Halsey took all of his battleships, including his own ship. He wasn't going to remain behind for mop-up action at San Bernardino Strait. This is going to be the big decisive battle. This is going to end World War II, and he's going to lead it. Throughout the night of October 24th and into the wee morning hours of the 25th, American sailors aboard the support ships of Taffy 3, ships with names like Gambier Bay, White Plains, Samuel Roberts, St. Lo. They were kind of a hard day supporting the fleet landings. To the south, they could see muffled flashes. It looked like lightning. That was a gunfire from ships like West Virginia and the others that were annihilating the Japanese fleet. And in the radio rooms, they could hear the excited radio calls and thinking, guys, the real battle's to the south, and we're missing it. At dawn, a aircraft from White Plains was looking at San Bernardino Strait and saw a big column of big Japanese ships with big red flags coming through there. And he radios back, hey guys, there's some ships coming through the strait. And initially it was another excitable aviator. That's Halsey's, guys. No, this is the biggest battleship I've ever seen with the biggest red flag I've ever seen. And soon on the horizon, the Americans can see these giant pagoda masts. This isn't supposed to be happening. And they knew that they were doomed. Imagine being out in the woods with your family, miles away from any help, and here comes a pack of wolves or tigers coming upon you. You're doomed. What can you do? Admiral Clifton Sprague, he immediately turned his ships to the east, and ran away as fast as he could, launched airplanes as fast as he could. One of his escort ships, a destroyer, USS Johnston, commanded by Ernest Evans, and there he is right there on commissioning day, on his own, charged into the teeth of the Japanese column. Ladies and gentlemen, a destroyer has, and this Fletcher-class destroyer It's crewed by about 300 people. It is as long as the distance from home plate to a foul line at any major league ballpark, about 330 feet. It has 5 5-inch guns. What it is facing are ships with 14 and even 18-inch weapons that fire a shell that weighs over 1 ton at supersonic speeds. And these destroyers have 3/8-inch steel plating. It is an absolute mismatch. But Commander Evans led his ship right into the teeth of it without even being told to or even asking permission by his admiral there at Tappy 3. Other ships, USS Hull, Samuel B. Roberts, and destroyer USS Herman also charged into the teeth of again, imagine, here you are, one person, your family runs away, and you run into this pack of tigers or wolves. It's the same type of thing. Commander Evans was described by Mr. Gijardi that day, and I remember they called him the chief. He was a full-blooded Indian, an academy graduate, and it wasn't with any malice, but he told him on commissioning day, "We are going to go in harm's way." Commander Evans had survived the Battle of the Java Sea in 1942. He wanted to go back and meet the Japanese. USS Johnston charged into the teeth of the Japanese battle line. And think about it, ladies and gentlemen, you watch war movies, but naval and aerial warfare is largely silent. On the horizon, the sailors would see a flash. And those that were looking through with rangefinders could actually see the shells leaving these giant 18-inch barrels of Yamato, heading to them, and probably impacting them in 30 seconds. Ed Gijardi said that when the shells came over the ship, it was like a freight train. And they brought up big, huge geysers of water. We'll take a look at those here shortly. Johnston weaved as it could, and it came in there and delivered a torpedo attack against a Japanese cruiser line. It then escaped back to the east. It had taken many hits. One hit actually went through the engine room, destroyed an engine room, so it's got 1 or 2 engines that's gone. Tremendous damage. Ladies and gentlemen, in keeping with the family-friendly venue that we have here, I'm not going to go into the details of what a 14-inch shell going through a destroyer will do to the machinery or the human beings inside the ship. There are plenty of accounts that talk about that, but I will tell you that it is devastating. And Johnston is being pummeled by these armor-piercing shells that go right through the ship without even arming, because there's not enough resistance in the 3-inch steel plating to set off the fuse. Johnston's own crew is firing 5-inch weapons, and these are crew-served weapons. A shell will come up through the magazine up there. It's placed on a tray. A powder charge is put behind it. It's put into the breech. It's fired, and that's emptied, and we do it again. And the crew is firing like machines. The Japanese have an impression that this ship looked like a machine gun. These 5-inch cruiser weapons are firing so fast. The guys are they know that this is their only chance. Whatever came up from below, the star shells, anti-aircraft, is fired. Commander Evans' shirt was blown open by an impact. Another officer was blown out of his shoes, which remained on the deck neatly tied where they were. And again, there are many more gruesome stories of the impact. Johnston escaped after that first torpedo attack and got a hit. That alone is a gallant action. That alone is a Navy Cross action for the crew of this ship. It escaped into a squall. It's got 1 engine out. There's many wounded, severely damaged. But Captain Evans said, "We have our 5-inch guns. We are going back." And they did, at half speed, using that 5-inch ordnance, giving everything they had, with the destroyer's hull and the destroyer escort, Samuel B. Roberts, with 2 5-inch guns. That's all the Americans had to defend themselves. The American carrier aircraft aboard these ships, like St. Lo and White Plains and Fanshawe Bay, frantically launching everything they could. Some of these airplanes launched with no ordnance, but they just did whatever they could to attack the Japanese. They just rolled in and did dry runs on them. Some of them strafed them, and these are little bullets, plinking off this armor plate. but it was enough to distract the Japanese. And some of these aircraft actually had ordnance and used it to good effect. Avengers like this one, which were not designed to attack in a dive bombing run, to attack these type of ships, and aircrew really not trained to do that. These guys do close air support. God bless them. But they weren't trained or ever expected to meet the Japanese battle line. Wildcat fighters, and we have one over here, which were not as good as Hellcats, but they did the best they could, just frantically fighting. Johnston was mortally wounded, and all the guns were silent. Half the crew is dead. The ship, Captain Evans gave the order to abandon ship, and the men went over the side. There's a Japanese destroyer that was charging hard on the crew of Johnston in the water, and the crew thought that they'd be machine gunned in the water. The Japanese came by and slowed, and the captain and his officers in full dress white uniforms saluted the crew of Johnston in the water, admiring the way they fought.
Barrage after barrage straddles the escort carriers, protected only by the intrepid destroyers. Destroyers lay screens of real and chemical smoke between the escort carriers and the enemy, then bore in to deliver a furious torpedo attack. One of the most frantic, desperate actions of the war at sea.
See those big geysers of water? Imagine one of those shells, hitting a ship and going off, and the damage that it caused. Some shells hit the carrier Gambier Bay. These are escort carriers. These are built on merchant ship hulls. They go 17 knots. They got one screw. Again, these aren't the fast carriers like Hancock and Bunker Hill. These are the guys that do close air support and combat air patrol, and God bless them, but they're not the first team. But they sure fought like the first team that morning. So Admiral Sprague is calling to Admiral Kincaid, hey, I am in trouble here. I need help. Where's Task Force 34? We're getting annihilated here. So Kincaid is calling to Halsey, hey, where's Task Force 34? Come on, what's going on here? Screaming for help. Now Halsey is thinking, okay, keep your shirt on, Tom. You got battleships down there. I'm dealing with the Japanese carriers up here. You'll be okay. Admiral Nimitz in CINCPAC Fleet Headquarters is listening to this, and he's rubbing his hands, thinking, what the heck's going on? And he turns to his chief of staff, where's Task Force 34? And he says, sir, why don't you ask him? So Nimitz says, all right, write it up. And Nimitz's staff wrote one of the most famous naval messages ever sent. The message to Admiral Halsey from Nimitz is, where is Task Force 34? He doesn't necessarily want to know where it is right now, but where should it be? Because you told us that Task Force 34 is going to be guarding San Bernardino Strait. It doesn't appear to be there. What's going on? So he wants to prompt his commander. Nimitz was loath to reach in, even that the technology of the day allowed him to do that. He wanted to let his commander in the field fight the battle, but he said, okay, I've got to step in now. So the message goes downstairs, where is Task Force 34? So the guys in the radio room, here they are, and say, gee, this looks pretty important. We better say, where is Task Force 34? And this is October 25th. And this is the anniversary of the Battle of Balaclava in the Crimean War, that Tennyson immortalized in these Charge of the Light Brigade. Into the valley of death rode the 600. When can their glory fade? Oh, the wild charge they made, all the world wondered. So the radiomen, they put padding on these messages, which is nonsense phrases, at the beginning and the end to confuse the enemy. This is when this message was sent to USS New Jersey, the flagship, the guys in the radio room saw it and said, okay, this is pretty hot. This is from Admiral Nimitz. We were bringing it to Admiral Halsey right away. So they take this message, they don't strip the padding off, they bring it right to him. Sir, you better read this. And this is what he read. Turkey trots to water, padding, which four-star admirals are not used to seeing. From SINCPAC, Nimitz. Action, Com 3rd Fleet, Halsey. Info, Commander-in-Chief, Admiral King in Washington, also listening to this. Com Task Force 77, Kincaid, the junior. Where is Task Force 34 and the transmission padding the world wonders? In his memoirs, Halsey said that he was stunned as if he had been slapped in the face. He threw down his cap on deck and said something he was ashamed of. He could not believe that his friend Chester Nimitz would humiliate him in this way. So Halsey brooded about it for an hour. Well, his fleet is still going north at 30 knots away from the enemy. And finally he turned him around, which takes some time to turn the fleet around. And then he charged to the south, again at 30 knots. And this is what the press dubbed the Battle of Bull's Run. After steaming 300 miles, about 10 hours at 30 knots, he got to the scene of the battle at midnight. There was a Japanese destroyer that was trying to escape through San Bernardino Strait. The rest of the ships that survived, the Japanese ships that survived, got through there. They were finishing off this destroyer. It was the only surface action Halsey saw in his 41-year career. Here's a picture of New Jersey plowing through the waves. I'm not sure if it's north or south there, but it's going somewhere in a hurry. And he was just over the horizon from the Japanese carriers, and he was going to take under his guns and be the next Lord Nelson. That didn't happen. Admiral Kurita aboard Yamato is in the general confusion, the fog of war. There's ships everywhere. His pilots, his crew is telling, well, not pilots, but his lookouts saying, we're engaged with American fleet carriers. These are fast battleships. He can see the blue airplanes attacking them. They're everywhere. He's convinced that he's engaged with Halsey and Mitsuru McCain's forces. And Kurita was not a commander like most Japanese commanders of the time that would just take himself and thousands of his men to a sure death. He said, no, enough. And he withdrew. Hearing from the Southern Force, finally, one destroyer left. Hey, the rest of us are all gone, destroyed by the Americans. He said, okay, this two-pronged strategy has one prong, and I'm taking a beating here. He withdrew. You could say that it was one of the worst decisions in naval history because he could have just continued on and annihilated the American landing fleet, but then where would he be? He would have been caught and he would have been put on the bottom. October 25th, 1944 was also the introduction of the kamikaze to warfare, a suicide aircraft, a precision weapon. A very lethal precision weapon, as the American Navy found out in the next 9 months. One of the Taffy 3 was hit by kamikazes that morning. Callanan Bay, Fanshawe Bay took some near misses. One aircraft, though, hit USS St. Lo. It impacted the ship after the flight deck. A bomb was aboard this aircraft. It exploded in the hangar bay full of armed and fueled airplanes. This caused induced explosions that in the next 30 minutes tore the ship apart. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a surviving crewman from USS St. Lo with us, Mr. Leo Jolliffe. Sir, could you please stand to be recognized? Sir, your name, please? Also a veteran of St. Lo. Thank you, sir. Japan lost serious losses, 3 battleships, 4 carriers, including the Zuikaku, the last of the Pearl Harbor raiders, finally destroyed. 10 cruisers, a bunch of destroyers. The Americans lost the light carrier Princeton, a couple of escort carriers, St. Lo and Gambier Bay, destroyers Johnston, Hull, and destroyer escort Samuel B. Roberts. but now the United States Navy had uncontested command of the Pacific region. Admiral Halsey had a tactical lapse at Leyte Gulf, and later he took his fleet through a typhoon, the second time he had done that in 1944. He came back to the United States and he met Admiral King and he admitted, yeah, I made mistakes in that battle. But King raised his hand and said, look, Admiral Halsey, when we needed it in those dark days of 1942, was the guy that says, no, we are going to take the fight to the enemy. We're going to move forward. We're not going to lay back. He is a hero. And under the tremendous stress of 3 years of combat, who among here could have done better? Commander Evans, people don't know how he met his end. Did he go down with Johnston? Did he die of his wounds in the water? People do not know that, and that adds to his legend. Here's a picture of him as a young man at the academy. And also a painting here of Johnston going into the teeth of the Japanese battle line. What makes a man pick up a burning magnesium flare from a B-17 and throw it overboard? What makes a man land his fighter behind enemy lines to rescue his fellow squadron mate? What makes a man fly his helicopter into the teeth of enemy defenses to pick up downed air crewmen? What makes a man sacrifice himself so his ship may be saved? Commander Ernest Evans was awarded the Medal of Honor for his action, the only Medal of Honor awarded for this action. It is certainly Leyte Gulf is a battle that all naval officers, and perhaps there's one or two here in the audience, should know about. You should know about these actions and know about the strategic decisions and things that were made among the flag officers, but actions like these, when the ships were down, people took action. They didn't even think about it. They just did it because they were committed to each other, committed to their task. Herman Wouk says this is something that every American school child should know about. Most American school children, not all of them, know about Davy Crockett at the Alamo. They should know about Ernest Evans and John Waldron and Thomas Hudner, Michael Estosin, James Stockdale. And it's up to us to teach them. Johnston's OOD, Mr. Gijardi, I'll wrap up with my impressions of him. He talked about being in the water and how terrible that was. And they were in the water for 2 days before they were picked up. That was another story, a terrible story. But he talked about Johnston and Hull and Samuel B. Roberts. They went back. USS Herman went in for a torpedo attack and was damaged severely, but they didn't go back. And he was upset about that. And you could see just that 77-year-old man in an instant was now 24 years old again. You see in his eyes, he was still upset. As I look at the veterans here that were at Leyte Gulf, we see elderly gentlemen, but they were once young men, strong and committed, and were there to serve. And that's how we have to remember them. Ladies and gentlemen, it has been an honor for me to tell you this story, especially with the gentleman that we have here today. If there are any other veterans of Leyte Gulf here, please stand and be recognized. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd be happy to take any questions or comments that you have. Yes, sir. And the comment made by the gentleman from USS Tennessee is that after the action by Admiral Oldendorf to the north, they were able to go back down the Surigao Strait and mop up the Japanese stragglers and finally finish that force as a threat to the American landings.
I was on the Gambier Bay as a fighter pilot, and my brother was on St. Louis.
Thank you, sir. That was the gentleman is aboard Gambier Bay, which was sunk by Japanese gunfire after a valiant effort. And Gambier Bay, and your 5-inch gun took some revenge before it was finally silenced. Sir. It was. This was the first use of the kamikaze, and throughout the rest of World War II in the Pacific, the Japanese used this precision weapon to great effect. Sir?
What sort of evaluation of this engagement did they?
I think the question is, what were some of the lessons learned from the whole Leyte Gulf operation? I believe the primacy of command. You had those two giant worlds in the tectonic plates rubbing along where they did. That had to be solved. Across one battle space. The search and rescue. There were hundreds of men in the water for days. Mr. Jolliffe, how long were you in the water?
4 hours.
Okay, so you were picked up right away. Sir, how about you? 4 hours also at the same time? Okay. Well, the destroyers that were just over the horizon from the carriers that were pretty much running away together, it was a couple of days for them. Search and rescue efforts in World War II were not good. And there's a story of USS Indianapolis in 1945, and they spent days in the water. That was certainly, we didn't have helicopters and we didn't have satellites and all the stuff we have today. We think, well, how come we couldn't pick these guys up? Well, we didn't have equipment, but we also did not do well as in the command and control of saying, okay, this ship is overdue, or we know this ship is sunk. We've got to go out and find these guys. They're out there somewhere. Yeah, we didn't do that very well. Thank you very much. I'm gonna say one more thing. Last Stand of the Tin Can Sailors is required reading for today's officer corps and for any of you that are interested in this battle. This book is on sale at our store here. There's also this book by Evan Thomas, came out a few years ago. It's a study of Ernest Evans and Admiral Kurita, Admiral Halsey, Admiral Ugaki, very interesting. Nimitz's biography by E.B. Potter is another great source of material to understand this battle and what was going on in the command and control spaces. Okay, now I'm done. Thank you.